Let imagine, you go from one end to the other end of America, but instead looks like this, the whole journey looks like this. Yes, that's the Sahara Desert, the largest desert in the world, with an area of about 9.3 million square kilometers. A dry landscape covered with endless sand dunes. There is only one word to describe that place. That is arid. It's not an ideal place for human habitation, with an area equivalent to America, but today, the Sahara Desert is home to about 2,500,000 people, less than 1% of the current population of America. To imagine how empty the Sahara, you divide the number of people by the area. In this way, each person would have nearly 4 square kilometers. But for what? I don't know, maybe to count camels. Just pause for a moment and imagine the Sahara Desert. You're probably picturing an arid landscape covered in sand dunes. There's almost no water. Out in the distance, there might be a few camels walking in the hot sun. It's not the most hospitable place. But ancient artists in northern Africa once saw a very different Sahara. The ancient artists once painted a very different Sahara. A Sahara of giraffes, hippopotamus, and animals of the savannah. Yep, animals that had to live near water sources. I don't know what they used to paint the scenes of livestock farming on the rocks in caves. I know nowadays, you still often see these animals running around in South Africa or Central Africa, but I'm 100% sure that they couldn't appear in the Sahara today. These rock art is everywhere, from the Western Sahara to Saudi Arabia. And it's also incredibly accurate, which means the artists were really familiar with the animals they were depicting. Assuming that, if these animals had never existed in the Sahara, ancient artists could not have drawn them so accurately. I mean, unless there was Google or AI image technology at that time. So the only possible answer is the climate in the Sahara used to be very different from today. And that climate must have been humid for a very long time for both animals and millions of people to live and thrive in the heart of the desert. It's a pity that ancient painters only knew how to record scenes, but didn't know how to explain them. So thousands of years later, scientists have to struggle to understand the reasons why did Sahara, from a lush green land, turned into the dry place like now. Geologists would find the first clues, not in the Sahara, but at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. Archaeologists would uncover seemingly unlikely evidence of vibrant societies in what's now the desert. And paleoclimatologists would be able to trace all of these bizarre events back to changes in the movement of our planet. All of these lines of evidence would come together to tell the story of when the Sahara was green. I am Honey Badger. Let's go back tens of thousands of years ago to see what the Sahara Desert would have looked like at that time. If you have any other interesting information on this topic, share it in the comments and consider subscribe to help the channel grow. In the mid-1800s, a German explorer crossing the Sahara encountered the paintings and engravings left behind by those early Holocene artists, and he puzzled over the mismatch between the scenes depicted in the rock art and the desert around it. Since then, modern geologists have been able to use many lines of evidence to confirm what the rock artists saw. Northern Africa was once much wetter, starting somewhere between 15,000 and 11,000 years ago, and ending 5,000 years ago. Geologists call this span of time is the African humid period, but it's also known as the Green Sahara. And one of the best pieces of evidence for a Green Sahara comes from nearby deep sea sediment found off the coast of Mauritania. The geologists have sampled cores of underwater sand and mud to study what's known as Saharan dust flux. That concept refers to the amount of sediment that was blown off the African continent and into the ocean. When there was more dust coming off the Sahara, that means these areas was drier, with very little vegetation, similar to the Sahara today. Conversely, if the dust amount is less, that means the Sahara was wetter. Surprisingly, the sand and mud indicate that the dust blown off North Africa was much less in the past, even potentially only half as much coming off Northern Africa during this humid period than there is today. This is further affirmed by ancient pollen from this area. The pollen trapped in those same sediment cores showed an increase in plants, like grasses and sedges, and a decrease in desert plants throughout the wet period. The evidence leads scientists to believe that the area where the Sahara is today was covered with vegetation, and it stretched all the way to the Arabian Peninsula. Not only the Sahara vegetation carpet, there is also a supergiant lake, spanning more than 100,000 square kilometers. It has contributed to the biodiversity at the time of our first civilization was forming in Mesopotamia. Besides this unnamed lake, Lake Chad was 10 times larger than today. These giant lakes receive water from giant rivers, such as Nin River, Niger River, and even a large unnamed river that has dried up in the west of the Sahara. Elephants, rhinos, hippos, crocodiles, buffaloes, antelopes, giraffes once roamed freely, with abundant water and vegetation. Civilizations may have flourished over thousands of years. They gave birth. Millions of people lived in the Sahara. They congregated near lakes or riverbanks to access fresh water and diverse plant species. They learned to forage along the shores and underwater, such as fishing or diving. The indigenous Sahara inhabitants remain closely tied to pastoralism. They have dairy cattle, know how to use pottery to process milk into cream and yogurt. With a dense population, of course, relationships between communities will begin to emerge. Commerce becomes a part of daily life, with abundant goods and resources, such as pottery, tools, weapons, plants, and animals. Communities across the lush Sahara have become part of a very advanced, interconnected civilization. So, what has turned this place into a lush, green paradise? And what has happened to make this paradise turn into a hell of life? The Sahara is different from now, because the Earth was also very different at that time. Scientists hypothesize that the main driver behind this humid period is actually planetary in scale. At the start of the humid period, cyclical changes to both the tilt and orbit of our planet resulted in about 4% to 8% more solar energy hitting the Earth than it gets today, and this warmed up the northern hemisphere. And as northern Africa warmed due, it was getting more solar energy. Summers became hotter and longer than usual. So, the African summer monsoon was able to strengthen and move farther north over the Sahara Desert. Then, as vegetation grew, the plants held onto moisture better than bare sand could. And that ended up decreasing the land's albedo, that is, the proportion of solar radiation that it reflected. When the Earth tilts at different angles, it will change the solar radiation that can penetrate the Earth's atmosphere. This can cause changes in the weather patterns in the atmosphere, including monsoons, contributing to increased moisture in the Green Sahara at this time. During the humid African period, much solar energy can penetrate the atmosphere, increasing rainfall, leading to the growth of rivers and lakes. Vegetation grows strongly, and countless animals. But that also means that none of these things will exist forever. Over a period of 20,000 years or more, the Earth's axis continues to shift, enough to change the overall climate in most places on this planet. It has changed the climate to the extent that it has turned the Green Sahara into an arid place, with hotter temperatures and lower humidity, causing many species of animals and plants to gradually become extinct and disappear. The second factor is human impact that has changed the potential for natural development. Some hypotheses suggest that the Green Sahara inhabitants were closely tied to livestock farming, which led to a disaster. These inhabitants may have overgrazed animals in the area, causing vegetation depletion. When goats graze, they erode the surface layer of the Sahara, preventing future plant growth. Additionally, with the population at that time, millions of people who once lived here may have consumed the resources of the Green Sahara faster than the rate of natural regeneration. This could explain why the Sahara dried up faster after the most recent wet period in Africa than any climate change before humans appeared. The climatologists say that if there's no human impact, the transition from the Green Sahara to the arid Sahara would have occurred much more slowly. When the Sahara dries up, the most advanced civilization of ancient Egypt begins to emerge. An interesting theory arises. Could the Green Sahara people have interacted with ancient Egyptians, and they may even have collaborated to share resources and develop new technologies at that time? And the final question, will history repeat itself? Can the Sahara be green again? As we have mentioned, a shift cycle of the Earth's axis is 20,000 years. The Earth's axis tilts towards the sun. Sahara will go through a dry period. But when the Earth's axis tilts back, the Sahara may return to its former glory. Is it certain like that? Because this time, Sahara has to fight with billions of people on Earth, a much larger number compared to the time when Sahara was green. Climate change has accelerated significantly, Humans exploit natural resources, destroy the natural environment globally, making regions like Sahara unable to recover, even when the Earth's axis brings this region back to a humid climate. I am Honey Badger. If you have any other interesting information about this topic, share it in the comments, and consider subscribe to help the channel grow. Now goodbye, and see you later in the next sections.